Mara learned early how pain could teach a person to be quiet. In the small Ohio town where she grew up, silence was the currency of survival. Her mother worked double shifts at the diner, hands always smelling of coffee and lemon soap, eyes permanently tired but kind. Her father had left when Mara was 9, not with anger or shouting, but with a folded note and a promise that never returned. After that, Mara became good at noticing what others missed. The way kindness could arrive without warning, the way love could slip through cracks when people least expected it. She carried these lessons into adulthood like fragile glass, careful not to break them, careful not to expect too much. By 27, she was living in Chicago, sharing a narrow apartment with a view of brick walls and fire escapes. She worked at a nonprofit that helped displaced families find housing. The job paid little, but it gave her something steadier than money. Each morning, she brewed cheap coffee, watched the city wake up, and told herself that helping others was a way of making sense of her own ache. Some nights, though, when the trains rattled past and the city felt too loud, the loneliness pressed in. Love, to her, felt like a language she once knew but had forgotten how to speak. Evan entered her life on a rainy Tuesday that smelled of wet pavement and metal. He came into the office soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, holding the hand of his younger sister, Lily. They had lost their mother 3 months earlier, and their eviction notice was folded and unfolded so many times it looked exhausted. Evan spoke calmly, but his eyes told another story, one of responsibility arriving too early, of fear disguised as politeness. Mara listened, not just with her ears, but with the careful attention she reserved for things that mattered. Over the following weeks, she worked tirelessly to help them. She stayed late, made calls, filled out forms, fought small bureaucratic battles that never made headlines. Evan noticed. He noticed how she remembered Lily's favorite color, how she checked in even when there was no new information, how she smiled without promising miracles. Kindness, he realized, wasn't loud. It was persistent. Their connection grew slowly, like something afraid of being rushed. Coffee turned into conversations, conversations into shared silences that felt safe. Evan told her about his mother's laugh, how it filled a room even when there was little to laugh about. Mara told him about the diner, about learning to be strong by watching someone else never give up. They didn't talk about love. Not yet. Love felt like a fragile bridge neither was ready to cross. Then came the setback. Funding was cut. Housing options disappeared overnight. The nonprofit had to let people go, and Mara's name was on the list. She walked home in a fog, clutching a cardboard box filled with years of effort and quiet hope. That night, she didn't cry. She just sat on the floor, staring at the wall, feeling the old familiar pain of being left behind by circumstances she couldn't control. When Evan found out, he showed up at her apartment without warning, holding a paper bag of takeout and concern. She tried to smile, but it cracked. She told him everything, the words tumbling out like they had been waiting too long. He listened the way she had listened to him. When she finished, he didn't offer solutions. He just stayed. Sometimes, kindness looked like presence, not answers. Days turned into weeks. Mara searched for work, rejection emails stacking up like quiet accusations. Evan worked overtime at the auto shop, his hands growing rougher, his exhaustion deeper. They leaned on each other in small ways, shared meals, late-night talks, walks through the city when sleep wouldn't come. Love began to form not as a dramatic confession, but as a steady warmth that refused to fade. Then tragedy struck again. Lily fell ill, a sudden diagnosis that came with hospital bills and fear that no one was prepared for. Evan shut down, guilt and helplessness warring inside him. Mara felt the weight of her own powerlessness return. This time, though, she didn't retreat. She organized fundraisers, called old contacts, swallowed her pride and asked for help. People responded. Not all at once, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to remind them that kindness multiplied when shared. In the quiet hours of the hospital, Evan finally broke. He admitted how afraid he was of failing, of loving something he could lose. Mara took his hand, her voice steady even as her heart trembled. She told him that pain didn't mean the absence of hope. Sometimes it was the proof that hope mattered. Love, she said, wasn't about guarantees. It was about choosing each other anyway. When Lily recovered, slowly and stubbornly, It felt like a small miracle earned through countless acts of unseen generosity. Mara found a new job, this time leading community outreach for a city program. Evan began to imagine a future not defined by loss. One evening, as the sun dipped between buildings and painted the sky in soft colors, he told Mara he loved her. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had survived. Their love wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the past. But it transformed it. Pain became a foundation rather than a prison. Together, they learned that triumph wasn't the absence of tears. It was the courage to keep going, hand in hand, believing that kindness could carry them forward, even when the road ahead was uncertain. Years later, the city looked different to Mara, though the streets were the same. She and Evan lived in a modest home on the edge of a neighborhood slowly finding its way back to life. There were mornings filled with laughter and others shadowed by memories that refused to fade. Love, she had learned, didn't arrive as a cure. It arrived as companionship in the struggle. Evan's auto shop had become more than a place of work. It was a hub for the community, a place where people trusted him not just with their cars, but with their stories. Mara often stopped by after work, sitting in the small office, listening as he offered advice or simply a patient ear. She recognized the same quiet kindness that had drawn her to him years before. It reminded her that people didn't need to be extraordinary to change lives. They just needed to care consistently. But pain has a way of resurfacing when least expected. One autumn afternoon, Mara received a call that her mother had collapsed at the diner. The drive back to Ohio felt endless, every mile heavy with fear. In the hospital room, surrounded by machines and hushed voices, Mara felt 9 years old again, helpless and small. Evan stood beside her, a steady presence, reminding her through touch and silence that she was not alone this time. Her mother survived, but the recovery was long and uncertain. Mara stayed for weeks, balancing work calls and hospital visits, exhaustion creeping into her bones. Old tensions resurfaced, resentments unspoken, sacrifices never acknowledged. One night, overwhelmed, Mara snapped at Evan, accusing him of not understanding, of having it easier now. The words left her mouth sharp and unfair. The pain on his face was immediate. For the first time in years, distance settled between them. Evan returned to Chicago early, giving Mara space she hadn't asked for but perhaps needed. Alone in the quiet of her childhood home, Mara confronted the truth she had avoided. Love required vulnerability, not just strength. She realized how fear had shaped her reactions, how the terror of loss made her push away the very person who offered safety. She called Evan late one night, her voice shaking as she apologized. She told him she was scared, not of him, but of how much he mattered. He listened, just as he always had. He admitted his own fears, how he worried about becoming invisible when she was in pain, how he didn't want to be strong at the cost of honesty. They cried together over the phone, the distance shrinking with every shared confession. When Mara returned to Chicago, they didn't pretend everything was fixed. Healing, they knew, was not a straight line. They went to counseling, learned how to argue without wounding, how to listen without preparing defenses. Kindness, they discovered, wasn't only for strangers or moments of crisis. It was needed most in the quiet, everyday exchanges where misunderstandings could grow unnoticed. As time passed, they began volunteering together, mentoring young couples navigating hardship. They never presented themselves as perfect examples. Instead, they shared their scars, their doubts, the ways they had failed and forgiven. People listened, not because the story was flawless, but because it was real. Pain, when acknowledged, became a bridge rather than a barrier. One winter evening, during a community event, Evan took Mara's hand and led her outside. Snow fell softly, covering the noise of the city. He told her he didn't believe in fairy tales, but he believed in choosing love again and again, even when it hurt. He asked her to marry him, not as a promise of endless happiness, but as a commitment to shared effort. Mara said yes, tears freezing on her lashes, her heart full and steady. Their wedding was small, held in a community center decorated with borrowed lights and handmade flowers. People from every chapter of their lives filled the room, families they had helped, friends who had helped them, strangers who had become something more. When Mara looked around, she saw proof that kindness echoed far beyond its first moment. In the years that followed, they faced new challenges: financial strain, miscarriages, moments of doubt that crept in during sleepless nights. But they also experienced quiet joys. The first time Evan taught a neighborhood kid how to fix an engine. The first time Mara watched a family she helped unlock the door to their own home. Triumph, she understood, was not a single event. It was the accumulation of choosing hope when pain offered easier alternatives. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to the nonprofit office where they had first met. The building had changed, the staff younger, the walls brighter. But the purpose remained. Standing there, Mara felt a deep gratitude for the rainy Tuesday that had altered her life. Love had not erased her past, but it had given it meaning. As they walked out into the city, hand in hand, Mara reflected on the journey from pain to hope. It was not a straight path, nor a guaranteed one, but it was real, and in that reality, shaped by kindness, patience, and courage, she found a triumph that felt stronger than any fear she had ever known.